emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and,
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 926.IS0324, certificate number 22584. La Pétomane.
First, I give you the tenor voice, the baritone, the bass, the soprano, and the harmony.
We've established in the dynamic of our show and in the dynamic of our friendship and on our online personalities that you are a punner.
A punster?
A punist. A punist.
Punnist?
Someone who thinks
punter?
that puns are funny. A punter. Let's call it that.
I don't think puns are funny.
Oh, you just have you like have a compulsion to make puns.
Puns are like farts. Your own smell good.
Is your father a punning man?
Yeah, I think so. But less off the cuff and more like long jokes that then end something like, a niche in time saves Stein or something.
Right, I see.
Like some punny spoonerism.
Shaggy dog stories that
then end in a pun. And make you sad.
Oh my God, I can see why your father is so frustrating to you.
So like, this is the kind of thing where each generation gets a little better. Like my son will do no puns at all.
Well, good. And he and I then could share a long bus ride.
You guys can hang out.
Maybe I should do a podcast with him because your puns drive me right up the wall. But they are extremely popular with people. People love your puns because they're very clever. They're evidence of a fast mind.
Clever is the eunuch version of funny. That's what George Meyer used to say.
But how are you with how do you feel about potty humor? How are you with potty talk?
I'm not squeamish about it. This is something else that I heard from George. He said, people either think potty humor is funny or sex humor is funny, but not both.
Oh, interesting.
And I guess the implication is that that one is kind of a
facsimile of the other, or a shallow imitation.
Yeah, the one is like the childish. The one is the adolescent version of the other. Like at some point, normal people should move beyond poo-poo and pee-pee jokes.
Oh, I was going to say, maybe the sex humor is the adolescent version.
You finally got to wait for your sex drive to cool so you can start making jokes about poop. The eggplant emoji gets replaced by the poop emoji.
I am squeamish about it, typically. I don't... we should say that George Meyer is our mutual friend who is saying to the futurelings, who probably have statues of him erected in their future virtual squares. But George is a great comedic writer,
legendary for his work on the original Letterman staff, and then The
Simpsons, and is a great sort of also a thinker, a good thinker about comedy and society,
and a guru in general.
Yeah,
because he's a very calm personality. He's not the kind of frenetic, neurotic comedy writer that you wouldn't want to hang out with.
He calms both Ken and I down. We often consult him even when he's not here. We consult his ghostly image,
his wisdom.
But I don't like potty humor.
Talk about that. Why?
I don't know. It always made me squirm, and it wasn't just squeamish, but squirm with discomfort.
Cringe.
Yeah, cringe. That's right. Even as a young person, I felt like that was, I don't know, base.
Like you find that the jokes about it are untoward, or you actually are uncomfortable with the the excretory process.
No. I'm not retentive. Nobody likes to go to the bathroom more than I do.
I gotta say, like, I love going to the bathroom.
Yeah, it's one of the best places, one of the nicest rooms in the house.
I had a Sunday school teacher once when I was like a horny teenager tell us that there's nothing more overrated than sex and nothing more underrated than a good bowel movement.
I think I've told you the story of the priest in Idaho. I was drinking with this Jesuit at the Fish Bar in Sandpoint, Idaho.
Is the Fish Bar
It was a bar shaped like a fish.
Is it Jesus themed?
No, it's fisherman themed. The entire
Jesus
bar
was a
was a
fisherman?
fish. You walked in the mouth of the fish, and there was a long bar against one wall.
Wow.
It was called the Fish Tavern.
Is it still there?
It's since been torn down.
Oh.
But it was a place that back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I drank there in the 80s. They served red beer, which was beer with tomato juice, which was a kind of fashion in northern Idaho. Other places too, but it was the only place I ever drank red beer.
Beer with tomato juice is called red beer?
Red beer, yeah.
It seems like you could add anything red to beer and make it red beer.
Well,
add raspberry jello. Why
I
not?
know. I mean,
Live a little.
St. Patrick's Day green beer is just
It's
green
just
food coloring.
Yeah.
But red beer is beer mixed with tomato juice, which was a popular beer at the Fish Tavern where I drank with this particular priest one day who asked me, standing at the bar, he's in his priestly vestments, he said, "How many bowel movements do you have a day?" And at this point in my life, that felt like as honest a conversation to have with a priest as any.
You can't say no to a priest.
And I said, "I don't know, one, none?" And he was like, "No, that is unacceptable. Do not ever have none. You should have 2 healthy bowel movements a day."
No.
And I was like, "What are you talking about? Do you have any idea how I live?"
It's kind of up to the universe.
Well, first of all, that's a tremendously privileged perspective because you need to have access to a clean bathroom 2 times a day, which was not true of me at the time.
He wasn't aware of his Jesuit pooping privilege.
I was like, "Look, man, how am I going to find a clean bathroom 2 times a day?"
Forgive me, Father, for I've sinned. It's been 12 hours since my last bowel movement.
But he had a whole theory, and this is, I think, and we've covered this from a variety of angles on Omnibus. People that are concerned with the health of the bowel, that is a 19th and 20th century fixation for a lot of like health educators and nutritionists.
And what was that standing in for, since we don't see it today? That must have been something about the time. Is it the lack of other kinds of test results, that all you have is the color and consistency of output?
Well, there's a long tradition of the bowel as a sort of metaphor, right? The bowel is a place where we are in some ways closest to death because we have the evidence of something that went in as healthy green food and through something in us, some immoral, before you understand what nutrition is and how digestion works and how food is.
It just seems like you're ruining good food.
Yeah, you took this stuff and somehow
you don't think you would have the sense that you have extracted great life and force from it? You just think you're ruining it? I think
we understood that food was somehow supplying us with what we needed. Otherwise, I mean, I can't even imagine what a
caveman would think.
What a
of pooping.
caveman would think food was, or how it worked. But in a lot of ways,
what if you didn't even connect? Like the way people didn't know that sex made babies. They're like, I eat and then I poop, but I didn't even think it was related.
How are they connected at all? If you think in some ways what you produce in excrement actually feels a lot more like it's a lot. There's more than
the food you ate?
Than you would think was in the food, right? Like it smells a lot more than the food does. It's like more intense. You have created a much more intense product
Especially
than the
back
food
then
going in.
when food was not intense. They had no
Sure.
not extra nacho.
I mean, they're
cheese
just
flavor.
somebody sits in a field and eats a raw beet, and then out comes all this amazing poop. Like, it's got to be extra. I should say at the top. I should have said at the top of this episode, trigger alert, because there's just no way to discuss this topic without talking about all of these bodily functions that maybe some people would rather skip over.
That we prefer not to talk about.
Don't listen to this episode while eating Salisbury steak.
Well, even John prefers not to talk about these things.
I prefer not to. But I think that the health of the bowel became a kind of fixation of the late 19th century and early 20th century because science finally allowed us to remove all of the humorous and squeamish aspects from excrement, and you could present yourself as someone who lived in a world of science by not giggling at poops and farts.
It's self-congratulatory.
Yeah, you could talk about this as a natural function, and you still meet people like this who wanted to. Well, this priest in particular, who want to make the condition of your bowel a topic of conversation.
I'm not sure this has ever happened to me. I don't know if anybody has ever wanted to know anything about my excretory life.
I think that the fact that we were drinking together removed some of the social barriers. And, he didn't ask me like anything about my sex life because what was he going to say? But everybody poops.
You can't deny that everybody poops. There's even a book about it. It should be the thing we talk about the most. It's the most universal thing, but instead we talk about the weather, which is the second most universal thing.
Yeah.
Some people don't go outside today, but everybody poops.
And not everybody has sex. Not everybody makes puns, but everybody poops.
Why don't we talk about it, do you think? You think it's close to death?
Well, no, it's disgusting. Like, we don't talk about it because poop is not...
Why are we wired to be revolted by our own bodily functions? Like, I understand why we have aversions to tarantulas and puff adders.
I imagine that as a person foraging for food, to discover a poop, it, in a lot of ways, I mean, it's certainly appetizing to dogs.
Oh, sure.
There's a lot about poop that reads as food. And so the revulsion... I mean, it's
like Nutella.
In a way, it is concentrated. If your body is bad at extracting vitamins, it's sort of like gold tailings.
Yeah,
there's still gold in them thar hills.
I don't know if they're hills.
All that's been taken out is the first layer, the most easily accessible nutrients. But there's still plenty of nutrients in poop. It's why we use it to fertilize our gardens.
So, yeah, I guess it would make sense that if there's some village that does not have the same kind of revulsion to poop, they all probably died of cholera.
Yeah.
All the dumb Kevins that were not grossed out by poop didn't survive.
We're made to be grossed out by poop because we don't want to mistake it for food. I'm just throwing that out there as taking a wild swing at it. But that's my guess.
I'm revolted by most bodily substances. So...
Well, because you don't want to mistake them for food,
I guess.
But also, why would we be revolted? Why would we be revolted by body odor?
What would you say is the least gross bodily byproduct? Is it tears?
Tears are not that gross.
Is it fingernails?
I mean, I certainly lick the tears of my enemies. It depends on how close you are to someone, right? Like you and I would not like to
lick each other's tears.
No, or have any contact with one another's saliva. But your wife Mindy and you,
or you
and I, if I'm ever invited, like trading saliva we wouldn't think it was disgusting at all.
Some people do. Some people are averse to any kind of kissing or other activity that might trade.
They are romantic with people, but they just don't want to kiss.
Yeah, like their saliva aversion will outweigh whatever the erotic charge is.
In order for the species to survive, we need to exchange fluids with one another.
Yes, but minimally and in a dark room.
That's right, minimally and with some like
far away from your eyes and other sensory organs if you can manage it.
Unless you are very sex positive, you are at some distance and removed from that exchange, right? That exchange is happening elsewhere.
If you're tall, it's very far away.
You could be looking at each other and talking about your household budget. You could be reading The Joy of Cooking and still make this exchange. Mm-hmm. And both of you could deny it ever happened.
I'm sure that happened for centuries.
It did. Where did this baby come from?
That's the history of Great Britain.
We have no idea. It's hard to deny that you poop. First of all, everyone knows it. And second of all, there's a lot of evidence. I mean, unless you really go out into the woods.
I mean, the great thing about modern plumbing is that it allows us to live in a world where we pretend that no one poops.
That's right.
You go into a little room, and who's to say what happened in there?
One of the wonderful things about modernity, we never see a dead body, and you hardly ever have to interact with poop unless you have a freaking dog or cat.
Yeah, if you have a dog or cat, you do nothing else.
But poop has also always been funny. And this is the crazy second question, I guess. It makes sense that we have an aversion to poop. But throughout history, dating back to the very earliest jokes, poop is central to what makes us laugh.
There is a humor researcher named Peter McGraw whose conception of humor revolves around what he calls the benign violation theory, which, as I understand it, says that we find things funny when they do violate some norm or expectation, but not too much. And poop has the beautiful quality in that it's taboo, and, for all these sensible reasons. It's gross, it's stinky, whatever. But
it's full of sickness.
Right. But the stakes are very low. There's not a lot of emotional investment. The way, for example, certain sexual topics might be a little bit fraught. Poop's a benign way to joke about the unspoken side of what our bodies do without getting into weird psychosexual territory.
And if you think about the first hilarious poop joke,
do you know it?
I think it happened. I think it was probably even pre-language. But if you think about it, it's a status equalizer. Because even the king poops. And when the king poops, he is no longer such a big deal. Right? So haughtiness and status and rank are all deflated when that person has to go behind a bush and poop. And so the first king that ever farted, it was the first time anyone laughed, but also the first person that imitated a king farting was the first comedian, right? Because what better way to, because it takes all the tension out of status, which is kind of the first and preeminent thing that divides us and puts tension in between human beings. Like who is the bigger tiger?
And that's a lot of what humor does, is kind of deflate or poke at those tense divisions.
Right. In our modern era where we talk about punching up and punching down, there's all this like grousing on the part of comedians who feel like they're not allowed anymore to punch down. But in fact, all the best humor is deflating the overstuffed aspect. It's all punching up, really, the best stuff. And it starts with farts or fart jokes.
Do you feel like that's the potty humor is fart jokes? Because it appeals to all the senses almost.
It does.
Hopefully not taste.
Fart jokes in a way, I guess, are more sophisticated than poop jokes. They're at one remove from poop.
Make the argument that they're more sophisticated.
Well, because
I see.
Because a fart is
air versus earth.
Yeah.
It's of the classical elements.
A fart is a suggestion of a poop, right? And it also is. There's an aspect to farting that is. It's very. You would have to be sick for a poop to sneak up on you.
Yes.
right? If you are standing there in a group of people and suddenly go number 2, there's something desperately wrong with you.
And with that party.
but a fart can sneak up on a person, and a person can be in the midst of their haughtiest self. A person can be issuing orders. Your queen can be upon her throne, figuratively, and
pee and poop are individual, but farting is communal. Not always, but when it's most memorable.
And it can really take the wind out of someone.
Now who's a pun?
I'm sorry. It's almost impossible to talk about farting without resorting to this kind of humor, and first puns, and then it's truly a slippery slope until you're just to Howard Stern.
If it's really a slippery slope, that wasn't a fart.
Oh boy.
So what? Yeah, there you go.
Fart sound.
Should we add a bunch of fart sounds to this entry, like we're morning zoo DJs?
If you look throughout the history, like there are so many fart jokes in Aristophanes, right?
Yeah.
There's so much farting in Shakespeare and in Chaucer, and in all the literary traditions.
Dante has fart jokes.
Yeah.
When the angels, the Malabolgia, the devils of hell are all assembled. The leader assembles his troops. Dante says, with the trumpet of his breeches. Like so instead of the devil farts to assemble the demons of hell, and Dante does this very kind of deadpan thing like, I've seen a lot of strange military maneuvers, and I've heard a lot of weird military signals, but I've never seen anything like this. And he's like the nice Italian Catholic boy,
right?
Who's trying to scare us off of lust and pride and envy and avarice and all these other sins, but he can't resist a fart joke.
Well, and like my Idaho Jesuit of the mid '80s, this is a safe form of body humor.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. That it's a way to it tends to land in people like that who do not feel like they have the freedom to make jokes about sexual or erotic topics.
Right. But it's universal and global and throughout history, right? The Kamakura period in Japan, in what we would call the early Middle Ages, they're like farters were important members of the court in the
that was their job?
Well, there have throughout history been there is,
because for me it's a hobby.
There is the role, and for most of us, but there have throughout history been professional farters, which is to say people whose position in society is determined by their ability to fart, and their farting is rewarded with either a courtly position or a position as an artist.
Just because it's such a good party trick?
Because we all do it, but like a lot of things, I mean, we all dance too, but we're not all great dancers. And you pay extra money to see a great dancer, right? I mean, it's not that that anybody can put butts in seats with their abilities, even though we all have the ability to sing and dance. And it's true for farting.
But the thing about farting is the ability that's usually lacking is the ability to do it on cue. It wouldn't necessarily be the melodious quality.
Precisely. And this is the thing. This is where our story turns to the cast of professional farters. You could not fart on cue for long just using the gas that your body produces as a component of digesting your food.
Yeah, there's not that much.
You just couldn't make that much gas. But like every gifted artist, professional farters are a class unto themselves.
How do they get around the limits of biochemistry?
They are able to take air in through their anus.
Wait, they can inhale?
They can inhale through their bottoms. And it's an ability that it's just a way that your anus is constructed by by the great architect that that some people are able to open and inhale using their diaphragm in reverse, but inhale through their bottom and then close their sphincter to retain that air.
I'm sitting here doing Kegels, trying to even imagine what that would feel like.
Yeah, well, it's a thing that some of the great farters in history describe as a talent that they discovered accidentally at a time in their life.
Childhood, usually?
Well, yeah, it's a thing that...
I mean, if you can do this, have you always known? Or
no, it's a thing that
could I discover in my mid-40s that I can do this?
Oh, I wonder. I wonder if you worked at it, whether or not you could develop this ability. The titular hero of our story, Le Pétomane, is what is the sort of nom de théâtre of a man by the name of Joseph Pujol, who was a Frenchman born in Marseille.
Wait, his name is Pujols?
Oh boy, it never really occurred to me until you threw the pun at it. But yeah, his name is Pujol.
I still remember where...
Pujol.
I still remember the delight on my son's face when he realized there was a ball player named Albert Pujols, and he was so happy.
I suppose you could pronounce it Pujol, but I believe it's Pujol.
Well, no, if he's French, it would be Pujol.
Pujol?
Yeah, right?
Pujol?
I think Pujol.
Pujol.
Yeah. So luckily he's not Spanish.
Yeah, right, okay. You're right. The J wouldn't be a H in French. So Pujol.
So he's funnier across the Pyrenees.
Yeah.
He should head south.
Well, he was funny when I was mispronouncing his name. And I didn't even I hadn't even intentionally made that joke. But Joseph Pujol, he was born in 1857 in Marseille. And he was, a theatrical kid, a fun guy. But at there was some just watershed moment. I'm doing it now. You've got inside me. No, I did it again. He was in the ocean on a trip with his family and was surprised, taken by surprise when his body cavity was filled with water from below.
I would be surprised if that happened to me.
And
that's relatable.
He was shocked and worried, scared,
and wet.
Got out of
cold.
the water, went to the bathroom, and relieved himself of a large quantity of water that had just sort of that he had taken on board.
This guy is so French, even the ocean is a bidet to him.
And it took him a while to realize that, and he demonstrated this talent, I guess, to a few people that he was like, wait, what's going on with it? He went to the doctor.
He goes to his doctor.
And he was like, the first exhibition of this talent was that he could put his bottom into a pail of water and empty the pail, suck up all the water, and then expel it. And he showed this to a doctor, and the doctor laughed and said, well, don't do that.
Doctor, it hurts when I do this.
But he very quickly realized that he could do it with air too. And then in expelling it, he was farting, but not expelling smelly gas. It was just the air from the room. And he, I think, pretty quickly started to recognize that this was a talent. It made people laugh. He'd be at work and he would say, "Hey, get a load of this," and do some little like.
And it would have the same noise we associate with farting, even though it's not.
Well, as he developed his talent, he realized that he could, just like any instrument, make a smaller or wider aperture, and fart in different pitches, and fart at different for different duration, and he could take in more or less air and create different effects,
volume.
And so in Marseille, in the sort of later 1800s, as he grew a little bit older, he started doing this as a show, and it was extremely popular. And if you think about this, the sort of late Victorian period, this was an era when so many advances were being made in the sciences and in culture. It was
none greater.
It was a great period in public entertainment. Like this was when theaters were burgeoning. This was the era of the Can and Sarah Bernhardt and Houdini. Everybody.
The music hall, vaudeville.
This was a time of great showmanship. But this act of farting on cue was a showstopper. And eventually...
Imagine if you're Houdini and you have to go on after that.
Well, I know, right? Eventually, Joseph Pujol started to call himself Le Pétomane, which translates roughly as the gas maniac.
Oh, I see. That's what the man is.
Yeah. And people loved to see it. And he went to Paris, and he went to the owners of the Moulin Rouge, and he said, "Have I got a show for you?" And although they were a little bit dubious, he took the stage. And
can I ask you this? Does he wear pants?
He does. In fact, he wears a tuxedo. He wears like white tie and tails. And
it classes it up.
And uses a kind of he uses like a megaphone, like the kind of megaphone that you would use at a football game. Like, okay, rah rah. You
got to do your thing. You have to do your Mr. Show thing.
Automobile.
There we go.
He uses this to kind of amplify the sound, but he's a gifted enough artist that he really needs no amplification. He's able to project to the back of the room, and he's very careful to advertise that there's no smell involved. Right? He's meticulous about enemas and whatnot.
So this is all on the poster?
Well, it
Mr.
quickly
Pujol guarantees.
It quickly makes the rounds because he becomes an absolute smash. And his show is one where, he starts off the show by kind of telling jokes that are punctuated with farts. He says like, "Here's the sound of a virgin bride on her wedding night." And then here she is 3 weeks later. He does this kind of like the kind of jokes that you would imagine maybe an amateur fartist
right.
might be able to accomplish. But then he would get more and more sophisticated. He could insert a tube through a hole in his pants and use that tube to blow out candles. And then he would play the flute and could play songs.
You'd have to insert the flute.
You'd put the flute into the tube.
Oh, okay.
The tube was part of the act. The
tube keeps the audience a little bit abstracted away from
right.
what's actually going on.
He could smoke cigarettes, inhale and exhale by putting a cigarette into the tube.
He could be the first guy ever to get lung cancer in his colon.
He told all kinds of stories punctuated with different sound effects. He could play songs. He could do different pitches even without the benefit even without
of a
the
flute.
tube. He could play different pitches and do imitations of people. He had an effect.
He did impressions?
Yeah. He had
like impressions of famous people farting or impressions of famous people's like voices.
Well, sadly, there are no recordings of Le Pétomane.
Aww.
At one point, Thomas Edison made some films with him as part of a project, and this will harken back to our Smell-O-Vision episode many, many moons ago. Edison was working on a thing called the kinetophonal factograph.
Oh, wow. I want to use the Tom Swift's kinetophonal factograph.
And the idea was that it would be a film that had a smell component. And so even though...
I think Le Pétomane is the worst possible subject for such a film.
Right. And Le Pétomane did not produce smells, but that was part of the fun was the idea that he was making stinkies.
Rude noises.
So there is some film, some very short film of Le Pétomane in action. But... and he had many imitators. So we have recordings of contemporaries or people in his immediate contemporaries who were imitating his style, and you get a sense of it.
Imagine being part of the cover band of some farter. I guess if there's a number of people that have that level of sphincter control, then you can learn the tricks, right?
Yeah, right. I mean,
it makes you wonder how many people can do it if they put their mind to it. Like, is he just a 1 in 10,000 physiological oddity?
It seems that it is a fairly novel talent.
Huh.
He had imitators, but a lot of them were outed as frauds.
How do you fake it?
Well, it's just somebody behind a curtain going. I mean, it's not hard to fake a fart, particularly one that's as theatrical as this.
You'd have to be a ventriloquist who could throw your fart noises.
If you think he had a bit after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, he often would close his show by doing an imitation of this 1906 San Francisco earthquake.
Well, that's in poor taste.
Which was a fart that lasted for 5 minutes. I mean, he had some circular breathing or something that he could manage to create.
5 minutes.
And if you think about,
do you know how many people died, by the way, in the 1906 earthquake?
Are you saying too soon?
I am 100% saying 3,000 people died. He's basically doing 9/11 fart jokes.
Well, but he's in Paris, so I
guess that's okay.
It's like people doing 9/11 jokes, except they're in Riyadh, which I think they did. So that is such a spectacular ability that you can imagine people would line up to see someone imitate it, even if they were faking.
And there's no account of people being grossed out about it or him being controversial, women fainting.
This is the wonderful thing about this, because these are sophisticated and proper audiences that
despite being French,
by all accounts, laughed so hard that the Moulin Rouge had to station nurses in the aisles because women in their tight bodices, in their petticoats, would start laughing so hard that they would be unable to breathe and they'd have to get carried out of the theater. And some people suggest that was a publicity stunt.
It could also be the contrast between the kinds of things there were to laugh at then. I mean, if you see this act today, you're like, yeah, I've seen 10 gross things on YouTube since lunch.
That's right.
Back then, a straight-laced French woman in her straight-laced bodice, this is maybe her first exposure to fart jokes.
And the contrast of him in his white tux and tails, standing up there and probably giving a very... He's not coming across as a gross lower class urchin. He probably spoke with a proper diction and
a lot of the humor is in the contrast.
That's right. The contrast is right. He ended up being the most highly paid entertainer in France, earning 20,000 francs a show.
Take that, Maurice Chevalier.
The only entertainer of the time that earned more was Houdini. He toured Europe.
Imagine a time when the most impressive art forms are getting out of a straitjacket and farting.
Right.
Those are the most prized.
Being able to fart the Marseillaise.
Like if there was France's Got Talent, those would be the categories.
Well, Britain's Got Talent actually has, it features in our story.
Wait, today? Like there are modern Pétomane?
Not so many. So Pétomane himself ended up parting ways with the Moulin Rouge, opened his own theater, and continued to have a sellout run of shows all the way up until World War I.
He's the first guy to do the Vegas thing of like opening his own Celine Dion
opened
theater.
His own place, and it's like, if you want to see the Pétomane, you've got to come. If you want to see the Le Fartiste.
But World War I killed the market.
What happened was World War I think the audience got more sophisticated, but also his two sons were both injured in the war, and he retired to Marseille and became a baker and lived until after World War II.
As a small town baker.
As a small town baker, running a successful bakery. I think he probably, if he saved his money, probably had plenty of
dough.
Plenty of bran. But then I imagine that farting culturally probably fell out of favor. You can't imagine a bunch of beatniks sitting around in the 50s laughing at this kind of humor.
Because you think it's faddish, or because you think it's not...
Well, in the
new kinds of sophistication get developed?
Yeah, in the same way that if you think about the bran-eating Kellogg health scold of the mid 20th century. We'll just think about it when we were kids. If a kid farted, the reaction from adults or teachers would have been, that's actually a very necessary bodily function, and it's not funny,
Right, you try to diffuse it by...
Yeah, we were discouraged as kids from thinking that farts were funny by precisely the school marmy, nutrition scolds that want us to believe that that's all healthy and natural, and trying to remove the taboo in order to, I think, create a world where we're not grossed out, or being grossed out by our bodies is no longer a thing. And there, you see some analogs in body positivism and sex positivism now.
That's true.
The idea that you would laugh at somebody's sex face.
Although we've definitely stepped away from the idea that you can defuse tricky topics by just saying the word. I mean, we're more prone than ever now to say, no, you still have to avoid the edgy words. Like, there probably was a time when comedians would just think, no, this is how you beat racism. You say the N-word so much that it just becomes a series of sounds.
Right.
And that's not a thing. That's out of style.
That is not, right, out of style. Whether or not the idea
it might have
worked.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that throughout our time, there are always gross out comedians. There are always people making fart jokes. In fact, Mel Brooks in Blazing Saddles named the governor William J. Le Pétomane.
And that's the same movie that has the famous campfire scene.
The famous campfire scene, right? And so this is mid-70s, peak fart humor. Howard Stern started using the character Fartman on his famous show. Fartman. He started using that all the way back in the early 80s.
I forgot about Fartman.
And he went on to make a film about it.
This is my forgot about Dre, is how I forgot about Fartman.
There is now a contemporary fartiste,
finally,
by the name of Mr. Methane. It should be noted.
Well, he doesn't use methane though.
He doesn't. No, it's kind of a misnomer. It should be noted that in Finland,
yes,
farting
go on.
And Fartman is kind of a beloved figure in Finnish culture. There's a kind of famous Finnish comic called Paresemies, which is like a Finnish mockery of Superman, where instead of, or like a parody of Superman, where instead of Superman, it's Fartman or Buttman. And
classy. Way to go, Finland.
It's it's part of I don't know whether to say he's beloved, but
this is a core popular culture thing for them.
Part of Finnish culture, in the same way that we have a lot of sort of parodic figures that end up being important figures, and he was, Fartman went to war against. During the Soviet era, when the Finns and the Soviets were, they were squared off as Cold War adversaries. Fartman's enemy was Comrade Fart from the Soviet Union, and Paresemies, so would win in the end.
Farting becomes a stand-in for Cold
War tension,
nuclear armament.
So in Finland, there is a kind of a long-standing World Fart Championship, where just like a mustache-growing competition or whatever, every year people show up and compete on their various fart talents. And
these are not Le Pétomane type showmen and women. They're just it's just who can get up there and fart. People just eat a ton of radishes or something?
I think there's probably a pretty clear distinction within the world farting community between people who are farting as a result of eating food, and then a true fartist or fartiste who is able to take air into their body via their anus.
So Finland is actually people doing the talent show thing.
I imagine in order to compete at a high level, in order to be invited to a championship, you would need to be able to do better than just your casual backyard farter.
You'd think so, because you want to be able to perform on demand.
Right. Mr. Methane is a British man by the name of Paul Oldfield, and he's not Paul Oakenfield.
Is he Mike Oldfield?
Does
he have tubular bells back there?
He's Paul Oldfield. He's from Macclesfield in England, and he discovered about himself that he had this similar talent, an ability to take air unto himself and then create music and
laughter,
impressions and laughter. He went through a phase. He's a little bit older than we are, but he went through a phase where he opened for rock bands.
Can you imagine going to? Can you imagine going to like a Jethro Tull show or something, and then this guy's opening?
He's like, "All right, check it out." He kind of joined the comedy circuit in the UK. He's appeared on the Howard Stern show.
Well, I've appeared on the Howard Stern show, and it doesn't mean I can.
My God,
it doesn't mean I can.
How did we get here?
Fart on command.
He made several comedy recordings, and they became extremely controversial. He did a recording of "Da Do Ron Ron," except with farts, and Phil Spector publicly really objected to it and said that he had desecrated this great work, this cultural work, by doing this.
Murderer Phil Spector objected.
He tried to release a cover of "In the Air Tonight," but performed all with farts.
Do you know that song is secretly about the time Phil Collins went to a party and somebody farted? A lot of people don't know
Interesting.
that. Makes you think.
But Phil Collins and his manager refused to give him the rights.
Yeah.
Because they like were really pretty upset about it. They were like, "This is a very serious song, In the Air Tonight, and you are again sort of desecrating this work of art."
It's a visceral reaction people have to excretory acts.
Mr. Methane appeared on Britain's Got Talent, and despite, I think by all accounts, performing quite admirably, was, I guess, gonged off the show. I haven't seen that show, but he was roundly rejected as I think there was a recognition that if you won or if you continued to the final round, you were going to have to perform in front of the Queen at some point, and everybody.
Wait, is that true?
Yeah, everybody acknowed that was not a possibility.
That's what happens in the last round of Britain's Got Talent. It gets all the way up to Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, you go up to Buckingham Palace.
Wow.
But unfortunately for Mr. Methane, the internet has changed the economy of being a fartiste, because as you suggested earlier, there's so much gross stuff. If you want access to somebody doing something weird with their butt, you can watch 50 videos in the time it takes you to line up to see a Mr. Methane concert. So he is. It's no longer the big earner. He's
so sad. You can't monetize farting anymore like our grandparents could.
He's gone on record saying, like, if he was just a little older, if he'd been active in the 60s and 70s, he'd be a millionaire. But
what a weird kind of bitterness to have.
Yeah, I know. He's going to take his talents to Miami.
I didn't start farting early enough in life. I'm a failure.
When Le Pétomane finally died around World War II, there were a lot of sort of doctors and physiologists that wanted to autopsy his body to see exactly what it was that made him have this special ability. But his family refused to allow his body to be disturbed. And they said, there are some things in this life which simply must be treated with reverence.
And that concludes Le Pétomane, entry 926.IS0324, certificate number 22584, in the omnibus. Futurelings, besides ruining the farting economy, the internet has also provided us with the gift that is social media. John and I were active in the community at John Roderick and at Ken Jennings and at Omnibus Project jointly. Social media also provided one good thing, a place for listeners, connoisseurs of people who liked basically pulsars, farting, stuff like that.
Whatever the Venn diagram is that includes pulsars and farting. And what are pulsars if not the farts of the stars?
That's what I've always said. You could find them in the Futurelings discussion groups on Facebook, Reddit. There's a Discord apparently now, even though I don't really know what that is. Maybe they're all getting together and Zooming. I have no idea.
Maybe they're discordants.
You never know.
Discordants.
You could send us electronic mail if you want to send us your angry notes from when you tried to have this on in the car and your kids had to listen to us talk about farts for 45 minutes. Please send those complaints to John Roderick. No, send those complaints to the Omnibus Project at gmail.com. Send us physical items, hopefully not fart related, to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155. I did not have, I finally found the note of the, on the last entry, the woman who sent us the vintage ties.
Oh, good.
So thank you to Sarah.
Sarah, those are wonderful
She
ties.
says, you got to look good for the cataclysm. Boy, truer words were never spoken. Your friend Richard Hadley, your employer on Alaskan Public Access TV.
Oh, yeah, Catch 22. Richard Hadley, the now vintage trolley restorer, or captain.
He sent us on some kind of... Where is this? Cleveland Motel Stationery. He sent us a request for an episode about Paper Sons, which is San Francisco earthquake adjacent. Maybe we should...
Okay.
Got to hop on the bandwagon. This time we'll be a little more sensitive, I hope, John.
Yeah.
And he also sent us a cool matchbook for the Skyroom Fountain Grill at Boeing Field.
Oh, wow.
Sometime in the mid-20th century. It is a beautiful little matchbook here. And I don't remember, some chick track was in this envelope from Scott, but on the outside of the envelope it says, archaeologists, the discovery you hold in your hands from the depths of this long-abandoned post office box, a relic from the age of great cataclysms, may justifiably reinforce your ideas about the primitive screwheads of this era, but do not just catalog it and file it away in some warehouse. This envelope is also a clue, perhaps your first, to a monumental reference guide of wonders and esoterica that might otherwise have been forgotten. In the event this envelope does reach its intended recipients, hi, John. Ken, hopefully this is a useful addition to your collection. He sent me a chick tract, but he was ready in case it never got opened.
Nice.
To explain to future generations. So please future-proof your mail. The other way you can support the show, perhaps the way John and I appreciate the most, because we use it to buy takeout, is to support our Patreon at patreon.com/Omnibus Project. You can enjoy the monthly addenda episodes, the images and other perks that come with membership, plus just being able to brag to your friends, if any.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We have no idea whether you continue to think that the expellation of gas from some inner
sure, whatever organ you have for that. Whatever kind of...
through whatever orifice.
Whatever spinneret or stomata you use.
If you think that's funny, well, that's on you. But we hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear, which may come in the form of, like, a collective earth-ending fart.
You think a giant methane eruption from Yellowstone is the equivalent of Wyoming farting?
What would happen if everyone on Earth farted at once? This feels like a Mel Brooks premise.
What if everyone only in the northern hemisphere farted? Would it move the Earth out of its orbit?
Oh, wow.
Hard to say.
If we all pointed in the same direction?
Yeah, exactly.
If the worst comes soon, which could very, very well be this episode.
This is a real low point. The next episode will not be about farting, I promise.
This recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the omnibus.